Good afternoon to our alumni, honorary fellows, supernumerary fellows, and all our friends who are watching us here this afternoon, and of course, afternoon in Oxford at the Jacqueline du Pré Centre. Thank you so much for joining us, and please let us know in the live chat where you're joining us from today. There are more than 1,000 people by now who've watched our new film, Life at St Hilda's, and at the end of the film, you'll see that as I was entering the JDP building, where I'm now speaking to you with my colleagues, Chris Wood, the Bursar, and Dr. Sarah Norman, our Senior Tutor. And you may have noticed that I've changed my outfit and left the cats at home. This afternoon, we're here to discuss the college's plans for the future and to answer any questions you may have. Let me start, please, by recapping our breaking news and some of the key points we were making in the film. And then I'll open up for your questions, and we'll be chairing the discussion and bringing in both of my colleagues to help give you the best possible answers. So please ask us anything. So we are absolutely thrilled to welcome you here today, and I'm just going to run through a few of the activities we have been engaged in recently within the college. And one of the first recent acquisitions was the 55-hectare Radley Large Wood. And this is a very brief 20-minute bicycle ride away from the college, very reachable, and it's absolutely beautiful. And we hope to, or we intend to, improve the area's biodiversity by active woodland management and protect the wood for the benefit of our students and also the local community for many years to come. And certainly we're looking forward to improving the college's net biodiversity gain in the future. Coming on now to our endowment, that is always a big question whenever we talk to our senior members. And this is how it has grown with the help of the Saracen Climate Active Fund over the last few years. And we have made a decision in governing body to invest a section of that in real estate to ensure that we have a combination of capital gain and also appropriate earnings during the year to help us feed into our budget here. And I will ask the Bursar to explain all of that in due course if anybody has any questions. But essentially it's allowing us to diversify and is absolutely necessary in this day and age. And so what have we done with that money? Well, we've bought 2 properties. And here at 38 St Giles, many of you may well remember having gone past this building. It used to host St Benet's Hall, and this was obviously in the aftermath of the very sad closure of St Benet's Hall. And we have now in possession, if you like, of this beautiful listed building. And we'll happily take questions on that during the question session, but it's a 5-story building above ground. It has lovely gardens and potential for our gardening team to transform the gardens a little bit. And we have a deconsecrated chapel on the right-hand side, and we will be thinking about how best we can expand the accommodation offer with other ideas. And this is the dining room that covers the entire frontage on the ground floor, and will figure in expanding our out-of-term event business in the future. Our second purchase is at Norham Gardens, which will be ideal as a graduate centre in the future, with space for more delightful gardens, and certainly our MCR is very interested in being able to host get-togethers in the summer in the future. It also has rather relaxing or space, pleasant social space to relax, and we have in these two buildings, we have a total at the moment of about 60 rooms available for accommodation, and with upgrading and some transformation of rooms over the next couple of years, we'll have over 80 additional bedrooms to cover all our undergraduate needs for the at present, and with some additional spaces for postgrads as well. Another project that is very dear to our heart is our library, the Kathleen Major Memorial Library, which is an absolutely vital resource for all of our students. The pandemic requirements for social distancing within the library gave us some impetus to make some other changes, and eventually it'll look rather like this from the air. You can see the red line surrounding a ramp to improve the accessibility into the library, and with some new gardens which, as I say, have been outlined in red. And this will actually pay tribute to Anne Elliot. It will be called the Anne Elliot Garden, and you can see the benches at the back, and the table would form the social space around the lower end of the access pass. And we're really very excited indeed that this is planned for completion, along with various other tasks within the library during the summer months of next year. And this is what the ground floor, the lower ground floor, would look like. And I know you can't read all of the text, but you can pick out probably that there are quite a number of study spaces which are really very much sought after by the students, and some more meeting rooms as well. So this is a reconfiguration. We're very happy to take any questions you may have afterwards when I've completed. And so therefore, that's more or less it, a very brief introduction. Thank you so much for listening to us, and please do pose some questions for us. We have already one or two that have been sent in advance. So if I don't hear quickly of anything hot off the press, we'll start with those. So thank you very much for that. So I think I'm going to start. Is that okay? I'll start with some of the questions we've already had. So apart from some nice compliments about the cats, how much undergraduate accommodation is still needed after the acquisition of St Benet's building? Bursar, I think you can give a bit more information.
That's a very easy question to answer. We are now able to offer accommodation to all of our undergraduates for the whole of their courses. So there is no further requirement for undergraduate accommodation at all. And we've also got sufficient accommodation to house around about 50% of our graduates.
Thank you very much indeed. Senior Tutor. That question was from Julia Bray, just retired as the Laudian Professor of Arabic at St John's, so just up the road. And from Mary Stewart, who was here in 1962, studying modern languages. Here in Cambridge, a lot of time and money is being invested in mental health resources for students. Most colleges, including my own, Robinson, are appointing welfare heads. What provision does St Hilda's make nowadays?
The welfare team has been expanded recently. I'm sure, like many colleges, we have a head of welfare, which we call a welfare dean. But recently we've appointed a welfare officer who is responsible, is here every afternoon and is available for any student who wants to speak to them. And it means they don't have to go to a fellow of the college. In addition, we have a college counsellor who comes in for 1 day a week, a college nurse who's here in term time, every day in term time, and a college doctor. And of course, the normal junior deans. We have 3 junior deans that keep an eye out for student welfare in the evenings and will take students to hospital if required at night. And then in the wider welfare team, we have a disability fellow, a chaplain who looks after spiritual well-being, and of course the personal tutors all have an interest in their students' well-being.
Thank you. And just a couple of words maybe about the MCR, the new MCR. Bursar, would you like to?
The MCR, there's an MCR in the anniversary building, which was completed in October 2020 and became operational from that point. And the MCR has been fitting out that room over the last couple of years, so it is now a very usable and friendly space that is, made good use of.
Thank you. And could you give us a few words on the Radley Large Wood? What are the plans for the wood in a bit more detail? I was rather brief. I was rather brief.
So Radley Large Wood is in Kennington. It's a mixed wood, but it has a significant proportion of ash in it, and unfortunately that ash is suffering from a disease called ash dieback, which is affecting quite a number of trees. Now, that's not to say that this is a dying wood, and in fact that is part of the attraction of the wood to manage and make use of it and actually rejuvenate that wood over the long term. When I say long term, we have a plan that stretches out at least 200 years, because I think that's the kind of time it's going to take to deal with it. In the short term, as the principal said, it offers an opportunity to increase biodiversity in the area, in southern Oxford or south of Oxford and towards Kennington and Radley, and we'll make best use of it with students and staff. There's also talk of performing some research in the wood in the spirit that it's done in White Wood at the moment on a much larger scale. But these are very early days, and we've only owned the wood since March. We're going through a process at the moment of assessing simple things, actually, like its safety, and ensuring that people can walk through that wood without coming to any harm. It is publicly accessible, and there are rights of way through the wood. So we need to make it safe, we need to improve some of the footpaths, and then over the next few years, think about how we manage that wood more actively and work with the Forestry Commission, with DEFRA, and government in promoting and improving it.
That was a question from Heather Armitage, who studied English in 1970. In fact, when we went on our little trip last weekend, there was very clear evidence of badger sets. We didn't see the badgers themselves, of course, but that also has all sorts of very important regulations for protection for these animals. So I think there are quite a lot of animals already in the wood, and bugs and creepy crawlies, and we heard quite a number of birds, although at this time of year that's not quite so rich as it will be in the middle of the summer. So I'm going to come on to a question from Sue Hamilton, who studied classics in 1968, who was asking about how it came about that we should have the purchase of these two buildings. And I think, was it down to me getting on with it, or did we have an unexpected donation? Yes, please, is the answer to that, or bequest. But no. And essentially, the decision came down to the fact that we wanted to diversify our portfolio, and all of a sudden, these two buildings came onto the market. And in the second half of the summer term, the Trinity term, I was in a conference of colleges meeting with the other heads of house, and we were told the very sad tale that St Benet's was not going to be able to teach as from Michaelmas 2022. So came back and told the Bursar what was happening, and in fact, the Bursar and the Senior Tutor told me that they'd already been on the case. They were aware, and were aware that potentially there were some buildings there. So the Bursar went up to have a look at the buildings, and he made contact with the agents, went to have a look at the buildings with his team, and it was investigated with all due diligence from every aspect, and I'll hand over to him to say a little bit more about that. And as a result of pulling everything together, working out the feasibility, doing the sums to make sure that we could earn an appropriate amount of income every year to be able to replace what we obtain from the endowment, or what we can draw down from the endowment, then governing body came together and talked about it. And it was a very interesting process. We had already been discussing what we should be doing with phase 2, and then this opportunity came up and allowed us to be able to obtain the rooms without having to take out any further debt that might endanger the future of the college. And it allowed us then to buy these two wonderful properties. There is a little bit of work needed on them, of course, but the potential is absolutely massive, and the feedback we have had from all over Oxford and across a wide range of our senior members from all around the world has been exceptionally positive. And I think I'm going to allow the Bursar to add a little bit more colour.
Right, well, okay, I shall certainly try. There's quite a bit of colour there. These properties came up unusually quickly, and are owned, or were owned, should I say, until last Friday, by an organisation called the Ampleforth Abbey Trust. And as part of their relationship with St Benet's Hall, they'd terminated their lease to coincide with the hall ending its status as a permanent private hall of the university. And they were in I suppose, a semi-forced seller position, in that they had to deal with various debts. which fell rather nicely for us because we were able to move very quickly. We did, as the principal says, due diligence on the properties in short order to ensure that they were structurally sound and safe. And in fact, they had students living in them right until the 7th of October, which is when we took legal possession. And in fact, we've been able to provide accommodation for 2 or 3 St Bennet students going forward who have actually not moved and been in a seamless transition. As part of our relationship and negotiation with Ampleforth Abbey Trust, we were able to get students into those buildings a couple of weeks earlier than the completion date. So we had students moving in from the 24th of September. These are all graduate students because we were a little bit late for undergraduates, or at least the sale was a bit late. So we've put graduate students into both buildings for now, and we'll review that in due course. But by getting students into those buildings early, pre-completion on the agreement of both St Benet's Hall and Ampleforth Abbey Trust, we were able to start earning money early and starting to see a return on that investment. But more importantly, it allowed us to talk with St Benet's Hall, and instead of paying them rent prior to using those buildings, we set up a small fund, actually on the suggestion of the Senior Tutor, to provide scholarships or prizes or student funding in the name of St Benet's Hall going forward. And the master of St Benet's, Professor Richard Cooper, was delighted to see that because it meant that at least a little bit of St Benet's history would move forward under the stewardship of St Hilda's. So the deal was completed on the 7th of October. We've now got 52 graduate students in residence out of around about 60 rooms. We're deliberately keeping a few rooms free to go through a learning process of how those buildings really operate, and if there is any windy rooms or drips. I don't think there are. They're pretty secure and they're sealed. But that provides us with a little bit of flexibility in the short term. And over the next year, we'll review how we use some of the larger spaces. As the principal showed, there's a huge dining hall in St Giles. There are libraries in both buildings, modest ones, to be honest, but there are libraries. There are common rooms. And we need to think how we use those spaces most efficiently and economically in the future. And that's going to form part of our thinking over the next year or so. In the meantime, we're really sort of bedding them into the college at the moment and absorbing them into our normal operation.
Thank you very much, Professor. It'd be very interesting to hear from the Senior Tutor how the students reacted.
It was quite fun because we knew we were going to be able to accommodate future undergraduates for all years of their courses. And so we had already indicated that on our website without saying how we were going to do this, which meant that for this admission cycle, the UCAS admission cycle, the deadline of which is Saturday, I think, we were able to tell our prospective applicants that we would be able to house them for their entire course. So that was a very exciting moment for us. We put it on the university's website, so we now join 20-odd other colleges which can do the same, which I think will take away a barrier to some applicants. It won't be such a worry to those applicants who haven't the means, financial means, to live in private accommodation for a year of their course. And we also announced this, well, you announced this to the freshers, the undergraduate freshers at their induction on Tuesday of Freshers' Week. And the excitement in the room was palpable. They were delighted, apart from one young lady who said, "Oh, I applied to St Hilda's because I could live out, but I let her know that she could if she still wished to." We aren't jailers. She could still live out if she wished to. But it did mean that the students don't have to start looking for accommodation in December. They don't have to make friends immediately in order to line up something for next year. They don't have to sit in the snow waiting for the lists to be released. They don't have to put down very large deposits. Their parents don't have to sign off enormously complex and scary guarantee paperwork for the landlords. And I think it's an enormous relief. And then, of course, there's the financial benefit to the students of renting what is essentially subsidised accommodation from the college, rather than having to deal with the higher rents in Oxford City.
And knowing that the care of the students is absolutely the core of what we do, because it's our first sort of, the first thing I read about the college was to provide accommodation for the students, to educate them, and to everything incidental to that. So,
And it's not just the accommodation and the cost of the accommodation, it's the fact that we own the buildings, they can call on us, they are more secure in that accommodation.
And the care is wrapped around them a little bit more. I think what's really fascinating to me was I thought this was going to take my entire term as principal to get anywhere near this. I can't believe it's happened in 8 months. So there's been a bit of a Cheshire grin. But don't worry, everybody, there is plenty more work to be done. I shan't be going to sleep. And I think what was very interesting has been the very quiet feedback we've had from different corners, from other heads of house who have mentioned a rather rich college and said, oh, I'm so glad they didn't get it. And I think I would like to just say a big thank you and applaud the governing body for being completely unanimous on this, from having a very clear view of what we want to achieve and how we're going to get there, and making it possible for the college officers and their teams to work so hard to be able to make it happen. And it was absolutely seamless. There will be bumps and all the rest of it, but we'll manage those, and I'm really thrilled. One other thing I'd like to say about the St Benet's alumni, they're very concerned about whether they can come together to meet, rather like the senior members of St Hilda's love to come back to their reunion. So we will arrange through the development team that there will be a weekend in the summer that is agreed, where they can have access to St Giles and come back and celebrate their memories of their time at the college, even though the college doesn't formally exist anymore. But very important that these networks are able to carry on, and I think that's an important point. There was a question about the chapel. What happened to the chapel now that Milham Ford has been replaced, because it wasn't seen in the tour? Who's going to take that one?
The chapel on site
The chapel at Milham Ford, that was in Milham Ford.
I can't really comment on that.
The sanctuary.
It's our sanctuary now. Yes. Senior Tutor, could you explain about the sanctuary?
I suppose there was a long consultation with various members of the college about what we were going to replace the Milham Ford Chapel with in the new anniversary building. We had designed a beautiful space with the most wonderful outlook on the end of the anniversary building. So when Bronwyn is standing on the roof in the video, on the very ground floor, facing south, with these amazing double windows and a beautifully planted garden outside of it, is a very calm and reflective space, which is managed by our new chaplain. It is a multi-faith space, and she arranges support for the different faith groups within college and those of no faith, to use it, to share the space and to use it for their own needs. And I think it's been very successful. The students from a very wide range of backgrounds now feel very included in the sort of spiritual offering of the college.
Thank you very much. That, I think, was a question from Anna McNay, Ray Milham Ford. We've had some questions asking about environmental measures plus energy costs, and we're somebody called EB, who's very concerned about rising energy costs. What plans does the college have in place to address these, and how might the rising costs impact students and staff? Bursar, I think this is absolutely dead central your question.
It is indeed, and it's a huge concern for the college, as it is for everyone in the UK and in fact Europe at the moment. So we're dealing with an increase in our energy costs of around 3 to 4%. That means in pound notes that our energy bill will rise to roughly £1 million this year. It's there or thereabouts £300,000 last year. And what are we going to do about that? What can we do about that? Well, it falls under 3 or 4 headings. One is we are, without freezing the students or making them uncomfortable, reducing the temperature of our radiators and heating systems through the college. Now, that's not going to have a vast impact, particularly as it gets colder in the midwinter, and particularly in the new year, but it will help us in the short term to mitigate use of energy. The second is, perhaps unsurprisingly, is a programme of education, because a lot of energy that's used in the college is actually unnecessarily used. And we've taken time this year, particularly with freshers, to advise them about how to use their rooms efficiently and carefully. So turning off laptops, turning off lights, turning off whatever they can turn off, actually, as soon as they leave the room. And of course, closing windows when radiators are bubbling away and heating the environment too. But very much like everyone at home, the solutions to the energy crisis are much longer term than simply turning off a few lights. And this sits really with our longer term strategy and approach to climate change and to decarbonisation. So I see this as a subset of that problem. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about that
please do
now.
Yes.
Because as well as trying to save energy, as well as trying to educate students and staff and everyone actually on the site to be more economical with power, it's about changing some of the infrastructure and the substance of our buildings. So over the last year and a half, we've gone round and changed every light in the college to LED, so that's low energy lighting, which provides actually in most cases more light than the old halogen bulbs did in the past. And we're going through a slow process, mind, of replacing single glazed windows with double glazing. It all sounds a little bit basic, doesn't it? But we still have a huge number of single glazed windows in the college, which clearly are highly inefficient when it comes to energy usage.
And some very large windows too.
And there's some very large windows too, absolutely. And even larger when they're left open, which is always disappointing. So we're going through that process. Thinking longer term, we have to address decarbonisation, and we have to think about how we move the college away from gas, which of course is the key driver of cost at the moment and our exposure to energy markets. And we've done some work over the last year or so thinking about how we would approach that strategically in terms of the work to be done to individual buildings, and we're still building that knowledge and that approach. But what it really means is that at some stage we're going to have to insulate our buildings much more carefully and more effectively, and think about alternative methods of heating them as well. No decision to be made yet, and this is going to take a number of years to address, but we need to start thinking. We are thinking about air source heat pumps, about water source heat pumps, even solar panels, although we do have restrictions, not least from the planning authorities, but we have restrictions in the sense that the college is quite small when it comes to roof space and land space. But these are hot topics at the moment, if you pardon the pun, and we're working with our consultants to think about longer term solutions. It all comes down to investment at the end of the day, and I think over the next decade we're going to be looking at probably a capital investment programme or a required capital investment programme of around about £10 million to deal effectively with decarbonisation. And I realise that's a challenge for every household, every organisation around, and therefore we're part of that problem, but also part of that solution.
I think one of the best south-facing roofs is that on the principal's lodgings, actually, so that's potentially an option in the longer term. And I think it's really fascinating. As an engineer, of course, I'm very interested, even though I'm a civil engineer and not a power engineer or an electronic engineer in any way. But my understanding at the moment is that technology is there, but it hasn't quite ripened sufficiently to be as efficient as it might be for the pound that we have to invest in it. But I think that over the next 5 years it will. I think there will be a sudden rush to market of all sorts of amazing solutions. And by that stage we will absolutely be ready with quite a number of pre-projects that will help save energy before we then go into developing and delivering our own. That was the question, by the way, is from Elizabeth, the aptly named Elizabeth Breeze, Bursar, given that we want no breezes in our rooms.
Well, no breezes, but windmills could be useful, couldn't they?
Indeed they could.
And I'm just going to add an extra point to that the college needs to move from, or like most organisations, need to move from gas to electricity ultimately. And as is known quite widely, I believe the UK electricity network is drifting towards carbon neutral position as we speak. The big challenge, or one of the other challenges for the college, of course, is that if it moves to a purely electric source of power, whether that be air-based, water-based, land-based, whatever it might be, is the national grid and the infrastructure that can support that. And those are some of the issues we'll need to address more widely in the local area, and perhaps talk with Magdalen College School, with residents in East Oxford about how local energy distribution is managed, and therefore the solution to this is not a localised college solution. It is a geographical solution in the local area, and will need a significant amount of discussion, collaboration, and joint working.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions for the Senior Tutor now. Please, are there plans to expand the student body now there's more space?
No. No, we were trying to... the reason we purchased the space is so that we can house our students who currently live in private accommodation. We do not wish to increase the number of students on course. And just for people's information, we have approximately 400 undergraduates. It differs a little every year. I've been here 7 years, and it's been that the entire time, and there are no plans to change that. We currently have approximately 200 graduate students, and this vacillates a lot because they are more... their ability to take up their places is more determined by private finance and scholarship availability. So we can't control those numbers quite as easily. But essentially we have about 600 students, maybe a little bit more if we have more graduate students. But we don't have plans to change it.
Then a series of questions about COVID, about ongoing impacts of COVID. Is teaching back in person? Are there any precautions in place in college, and is it a safe place for vulnerable students? So you can start where you wish.
Where shall I start?
Nicolette Jones was
thank
responsible for one of those.
So if we think back to what we've learnt over the last couple of years, through our pandemic experience, we've learnt how to teach in a safe environment. We taught in person in Michaelmas term 20, when many organisations hadn't gone back to work. During that period, I think we monitored all cases of infection between students and within the student and staff population. And the university had no recorded cases of student to staff transmission. There was a lot of transmission between the students, but there was no transmission to staff. So we are still in a cautious place, I think we put it. People, of course, can take personal safety measures. We see students and staff members wearing masks if they feel that they would like to. We still have the same measures with hand washing. We prop our doors open so there are less touch plates. We encourage ventilation where we are not wasting too much energy to do so, but we teach in bigger spaces, we sit further apart. So I think we've learnt a lot through that. In terms of current cases, the university still monitors the cases of COVID, and there has been a little up tilt in the last week or so. I read the report that came out of the meeting that was held only a couple of days ago, and we have very good advice from a local infection control doctor, And he indicated that although people are catching COVID and they are unwell, there are no people going to hospital with it. So I think the very vulnerable are being very well protected.
Thank you very much, Senior Tutor. And I think one other point, I find it really, in a sense, quite frustrating to hear that the university still plans to host some of the examinations in the students' rooms in college. And this, for me, is absolutely incredible, given that as rector of ETH in the summer, in August of 2020, we organised under my jurisdiction, if you like, 13,000 students, with each of them with 5 exams during that stage in the pandemic, and there were a handful of infections. So frankly, it can be done. I wonder if the Senior Tutor would care to give her view on that, because it does lock the entire place up for the summer, and it might be interesting for our senior members to hear that.
A little insight in what it's like to be in a college when you're doing your exams online. So obviously in 2020, all the students had to go home and they did their exams from home. And so we were dealing with students who didn't have the correct, I suppose, electronic materials in order to study online. And we managed to support the students even when they were at home. And actually that year, everybody was online. Since then, some of the subjects have gone back to in-person exams. And that's obviously incredibly important for some subjects where it would be too easy to look up an answer online. So maths, physics, chemistry, medicine, very much in-person exams. Anything that requires translation, Greek, Latin, modern languages, they're all in person again. There are still quite a lot of literature papers, extended periods of work. So in order to accommodate people with various different disabilities, there was a blanket approach where actually students were given 8 hours to do an online exam. And actually, although you think to yourself, well, that's actually great, because it gives the opportunity for the student to have a break. They can go away, and actually these are open book exams, they can go away and look things up. Actually, it caused the most enormous amount of stress in a very small amount of people who thought that they had to write answers for 8 hours.
Be perfect.
So, you know, the mitigation that was put in place isn't ideal for everybody.
No.
And then, of course, it becomes problematic if it is possible to copy and paste information in your own bedroom. That is, you know, for the individual, the situation. But for the college, we were being asked to find quiet rooms for students to act as exam rooms. And when you have 250 students on site, all needing individually at different times to be kept quiet, that became very problematic. We had students in private accommodation with neighbours that were noisy. That became problematic. So ideally, I think it would be better to go back to in-person in the exam school, which is a much more controllable environment, and it becomes a level playing field for students to compete.
We're lobbying with the authorities,
I think. We are
I
trying very hard to encourage faculties and departments to return to the in-person format. There are some situations where extended essays are beneficial. Different formats of assessment are useful and more inclusive. But I don't think across the board it's very helpful.
No. And there are some questions from Fran Woodcock, amongst others. Has the pandemic or financial crisis affected the number and demographics of students applying to St Hilda's? And from Andrea Roger and others, how has Brexit impacted upon the number of graduate students applying to Oxford and undergraduates from the EU? So there's a lot about students coming here.
So if we take the first question, which was the impact of the pandemic
or financial crisis.
And the financial crisis, we haven't seen a drop in the number of applicants this year. This year has been a relatively normal year for admissions to arrive this year. There was a bit of a blip in the 2020-21 year, So at the undergraduate level, lots of students managed to take up their first choice place in 2020 because the teacher assessment grades were more generous than normal. That meant that there was a shuffling of places. A lot of other universities asked for deferrals, and that held back places for the 21 arrival year. So that was a shifting of places. I don't think it had an enormous change on the applicants. We did find that a number of, I suppose, North American applicants who had places for the October 21 year, some of those pulled out, which was unfortunate because they tend to cluster in certain undergraduate courses, and so it decimated PPE that year. But we managed to draw in students from other colleges. In terms of, so the pandemic hasn't had that much of an effect. I think there was a bit of a bump with the undergraduate admissions, but it's levelled out again. In terms of EU and Brexit, it's had a devastating effect on students applying from the EU. Really very bad. Our numbers have dropped by about half of our students on course at both the undergraduate and the graduate level, which is incredibly upsetting, especially for students who were studying modern languages and European literature. What's replaced them, one might ask? Well, it's kind of an even amount of international and home students. So we thought that the EU students would be replaced only by international students, but actually what it's done is it's created more spaces for the home students as well.
Which is also positive. I have just been invited, and I put invited in inverted commas, to join the admissions committee, which is a bit unfair in the first year, I might say, but I've discovered that the figures are 80% home students, 4% EU students, and then the 16% roughly, sort of with rounding, of the international students. And if the EU students have halved, then you can see roughly what's happened to the other numbers. So I think that's quite an interesting set of stats. But you know, the graduate students, however, it is more of a challenge, and especially I've learned that there is PGT, which is postgrad teaching, and PGR, postgraduate research, and that there are some troubles actually in filling the number of places that Oxford would like to be able to offer with students. Is that not right? Am I wrong about that?
I think that's a fair summary, yes.
So it's not as easy as it was to find a good postgraduate student.
I think the good students are still there,
good ones,
but there has been an expansion in postgraduate numbers. We cap our undergraduate numbers very tightly, but the postgraduate courses have been allowed to expand. And although you still get lots of very good applicants, what we have is a sort of slight imbalance in what the departments would like and what the applicants apply for. And so most departments would like more research students, but we can't, because they tend to be longer courses, it's more expensive for a student to do a research degree. We don't quite meet our quota across the university. I'm not talking about St Hilda's. We don't quite meet our quota for research students, and we have an oversubscription of people that wish to do postgraduate taught courses, which are the short 9 to 12-month courses.
Okay, that's really helpful. I have a number of questions from Nina Ozer. Her first ones were concern about the nutrition supplied to students living in our new buildings. Do they have to walk and cycle to St Hilda's for meals, or will food be transported to the new buildings for them? Bursar, I think that's yours.
Interesting question.
Or do they have student kitchens there?
Well, you've just answered my question. There are student kitchens in both buildings. We're also encouraging students to come into college for meals. But these are all graduates, and therefore this year, and able to look after themselves generally. Looking forward, when we get undergraduates in those buildings, I think it's likely that we will start to open up separate catering facilities, and certainly for events and conferences and other things happening over the summer, I think we'll definitely need to deal with catering locally. But no one's going hungry, and everyone is well fed.
Thank you very much. And another question about the college choir. Where does it practice now? Because it used to be in Millham Fort, also from Nina Oza. Well, as far as I understand, they sometimes practice here, but they much prefer to go into the new Riverside Pavilion. So if there's not something else going on there, then they sometimes may be found there. And where else do they practice Senior Tutor? Is there, I missed anything out?
There was a stage when they were practicing outside, I believe.
Yes.
There was a lot of singing in the cold during COVID, but I think they like the pavilion. It's got very good acoustics.
It's lovely, isn't
It's
it?
a very beautiful
Yes.
room to be in. It's a pleasure to be in there. And this is a suitable room, but if you're trying to have distance, then it's harder to create, because it's a very popular choir, there are many members.
Yep.
It's harder to have distance on this stage because it's relatively small.
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is on the same piece of real estate as Millham Ford, perhaps not exactly in the same pixel, but so singing practice is happening next to the River Cherwell, and everything in the world is lovely as far as the choir are concerned if they can do it there. So that's all excellent. I'm waiting for a few more questions. It's gone a bit quiet out there. I don't know if we've satisfied all your curiosity at the moment. Otherwise, I can see I'm being sent the messages. It's twinkling in front of me. Any comments in the meantime from either of you? You'd like to expand on anything, or coming to the end of the questions? It sounds like it. Well, in that case, I think we're going to have a final statement from each one of us, starting from the Bursar. Would you like to share any last words with our senior members?
I think it comes back to these two buildings we've bought, which we've been extraordinarily fortunate to come across them and to execute a swift transaction, which is, I think, taking the college to a completely new place, not literally, well, literally as well as metaphorically, and has moved us forward very, very quickly indeed. It means that we've now got options to do other things. We've got choices, and we can support our student population much more ably than we could just a few weeks ago.
Senior Tutor.
I suppose the thing I would like to inform our senior members of that they may not be aware of is how now that we have this amazing offering to our applicants and current students, we very much want to raise awareness of the college to the greater population, and I'm sure many of our senior members know that our outreach used to be focused just on Surrey because it was our designated area, but we've expanded, we collaborate with many colleges, and we now cover Hampshire and Surrey in terms of physical visits, but we have recently received confirmation of a donation that will allow us to expand our outreach activities to underrepresented groups, and those will include people who the university and the college find difficult to attract, and we will be doubling up, if not tripling, our efforts in that regard. And one thing that we are announcing is a senior ambassador scheme where we can provide people who have contacts with schools with information to spread the word, so that we can cover the whole country, if not wider.
Love that idea. Absolutely fantastic. So, and again, picking up on the Bursar's point, I didn't say it before, but we were quite competitive and rather combative with our pricing. We were quite clever about that, I have to say. So I'm very pleased, and the Bursar led us through that really remarkably well. So thank you so much for participating, engaging with us today. It's been slightly strange to have you only on the electronic approach and not having you there in person. It's much more fun in person, isn't it? But at least we can talk with all of you and share what we're up to these days. And I hope now you can understand our ambitious series of programs that we've embarked upon, and can see how successfully we've transformed the site through the wonderful film, and all the opportunities we can now offer our students and fellows through the acquisition of these new properties. So you are always welcome, wherever you are in the world, to come and visit us. And I am going to say this, aren't I? Please consider supporting us financially. It makes such a difference to the opportunities that we can offer our students and enable them to flourish. And we invite you to, in the memory of what you experienced here, to contribute to the future of your college at this very difficult time. And we welcome all contributions. Thank you so much for being with us today, and good afternoon from Oxford.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.